Well, thank you very much, Kusasara, for that introduction. And the original Sub-30 team is back together for Paranirvana Day. And it's been really enjoyable and moving and special as a day in itself. And I just want to thank everyone who's come and just contributed to the day. It's been really, really good, really special, quite moving at times. So here we are, with Paranirvana Day. We're here to observe and consider this situation where the Buddha's life passes, where the Buddha passes away. And, just more generally, death. I mean, as Kusasa said, I work in palliative care. It's quite a mystery. I literally talk to people about death and dying all day. And it's honestly, I feel no more in the loop of what goes on than 7 years ago before I got into palliative care. It just remains that kind of mystery. Even literally this week, somebody said to me, "Well, no one's ever come back to sort of say what it's like, have they?" Because I'm talking to this person about their own, the fact that they're approaching the end of their life. And it's true, we just don't really know what really goes on. But all the Buddhist traditions, all agree that death is definitely not the end, that consciousness is sort of not so tied up with this physical body. It's not like that. That this physical world as it is, that's not all there is. There's much more, and the Buddhist tradition recognises that. And I'll tell a few stories in this talk about how the Buddha might have thought about death and how the Buddha sort of was in death. I guess one thing I should say is that, as Buddhists, we really don't, as you can see, it's not something we really shy away from. It's something, if anything, we sort of move towards and try and think about and contemplate as fully as we can. And I felt that just now doing the remembrance ceremony. I couldn't get nervous for this talk, for instance. It wouldn't have been appropriate to contemplate people's passing and then be worried about myself in that way, with all these names being read out of people who passed away. So that's why, as Buddhist practitioners, we do consider death as closely as we can and think about it, and we don't let it creep up on us. We don't. It's going to apply to us all anyway. We don't know when or where it's going to happen. So, let's live our lives with that in mind, I suppose. So the Paranirvana Day Festival reminds us of death. It sobers us up. It gives us a focus, and it really puts things into perspective. It really reminds us of what's important. And I feel the same with the work that I do with people approaching the end of the life. It does. It's quite hard work, but it does really put things in perspective. There is a practice. There is a meditation practice on death. Actually, there is a sort of specific recollection of death practice that's taught to Buddhists. It tends to be sort of not something you get it in an intro class, unsurprisingly. But then again, we have Paranirvana Day, that's open to everyone, so we definitely don't shy away from it. But I guess what we always sort of say is that, and why it works in a festival atmosphere and with everything that we're doing, is while we're recollecting death, while we're considering the fact of our own death and the death of our loved ones, we do that with as much self-awareness as we can. So that if we just sort of tripped into it a bit, we could find ourselves in a pretty bad mental state. It's something you need to kind of go into with your eyes wide open, understanding yourself and your own sort of emotional life and the sorts of things that your mind will do. So you don't consider death lightly. I wouldn't suggest that. when we did the remembrance ceremony, we did the metabhavana practice, so that we want to cultivate things like gratitude and loving kindness when we consider somebody's death or our own death. But also too, probably just as important, if not more important, and what we have been evoking all day, is our faith, our shraddha in the Buddha. So, right throughout the day, we've been really trying to bring the sort of the qualities of the Buddha, the sort of, as much as we can understand, the sort of experience of the Buddha and the life of the Buddha to mind, in the face of this situation of death, because it gives us faith about how we might live our life. It gives us a lot of positivity, and it gives us a structure to consider death, because it's pretty confronting, and can be quite scary. We don't do it to be morbid, and we don't want to get depressed. And when we were contemplating the Buddha's qualities, it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult to have any full sense of the. Well, it's not even really difficult. We don't really know what the Buddha's mind is. It's as mysterious as death. So the Buddha, the way we've considered him today, we did this reflection practice, and we were sitting and trying to imagine the Buddha, and then we're reading out things about him, talking about a sort of perfect mind, a mind that is calmed, so a completely calmed mind, a mind that has extinguished all its craving, it's got no fear, nothing disturbs their composure, they're completely calm. And there was all these things, and this is from a question that was asked of the Buddha. What is the Buddha's mind? How do they see things? How do they behave? And they're not. And the Buddha was saying, well, that these perfect people, they're not full of themselves. They're gentle. They're alert. They don't have a blind faith. They're not averse to anything. They don't hold on to anything. And all these things, one after another, and it gives us a bit of a sense of the Buddha. But even in those descriptions, you can tell it's not like a normal person. It's not a human mind. It is mysterious and much beyond the sort of, even the kind of most highest minds that we can come across. The Buddha's mind is way beyond that. In the children's thing, we were touching on this a bit, and somebody said, it all sounds a bit boring, doesn't it? Having none of these things, none of these passions. And it was a good point, actually. Couldn't completely disagree, but it's only one way of talking about it, and we had to sort of do a little correction there and talk about, talk a bit more about what it's like to be calm, for instance, what it's like to be at peace, and perhaps to feel really free and sort of have that kind of real free, spontaneous creativity. So there's positive ways you can talk about it as well, but it's still, if you take those positive qualities and you sort of take them as far as they go and say that that's happening all the time, the Buddha's mind is sort of it's off beyond the horizon. And we're marking today that mind and that being whose body is then passes away. And as I said, the Buddhist traditions all agree that the consciousness is not so tied up with that body, and to be free of the body sort of takes it into an even deeper level of mystery. And I have a little bit of a personal experience of this, because the founder of our order, Bhante Sanghajit, he had a funeral a couple of years, coming up 4 years ago now, and the whole movement and people coming from all over the world. There's like 3,000 order members now, and there's well over 2,000 people at his funeral, and I sort of get a little bit goosebump just thinking about it. But for me, I remember doing the Metta Bhavana at his funeral, and I really had a sense, and I wasn't the only one, that there was something moving around that. Well, it was a great big barn outdoors actually, but it definitely felt. I mean, I didn't have to make any effort whatsoever for this, new level of metta just to really naturally arise. So I found that really interesting. I guess the other thing to say when we're considering death is how much you sort of, and this is sort of where I'm going to go with this talk, is talk about what happened before the Buddha died. One of the things that if somebody said to me, people say to me all the time, "Oh God, your job must be hard," and honestly, it's not, because what one of the things that I say if people genuinely ask me that question is, what I get to see about a person in the last part of their life is huge. You get to see so much of a person's life in that last phase. Often people, the people I come across anyway, are suffering quite a lot. So you see who comes around them and how they attend to them and how they interact with them. So you see the relationships and the nature of the relationships of their life. It's really, really moving. And sometimes it's really poignant too when you meet somebody who doesn't really have anyone, for instance. And you've got, the NHS doing the best. And so that happens quite a lot. You've got this whole range of, and you're coming into somebody's life and you see so much of their life at the end. And I always think, maybe I make these things up a little bit, but I always feel like their death does feel like a bit of a reflection of their life as well. Look, it's very much like that with the Buddha as well. The Buddhist scriptures, the most detailed and biggest sections of the Buddhist scriptures are the last year of the Buddha's life. So it's a sort of well-known situation. It was very important for the people who knew the Buddha to recollect the last year of his life and what happened just prior to his life. So we've got quite a number of things here to sort of address, to tell you about. And I'm just going to dive right in, because there's quite a lot of interesting and really beautiful stories. But it does start with him, not surprisingly, I suppose, becoming sick. And this is in the Buddhist tradition. We always going on retreat has always been a part of the tradition, and this began with the Buddha and his disciples going on retreat when it started raining, in the monsoon season in India. And so they would do this every year. They would go on retreat during the rainy season, and during the last rains retreat that the Buddha experienced in that way was he became sick on that retreat. And he's got this, and what's really lovely about the Paranirvana Sutta, which is what it's called, this sutra of the last year of the life of the Buddha, it's filled with Ananda, his attendant. So again, it's a bit like what I was saying about who's around a person when they're dying. And Ananda is right by his side for that last year of his life. He's always there. And Ananda is this guy with a photographic memory. So because he's with the Buddha the whole time and he remembers everything, this all feeds into this Mahaparinirvana Sutta and all these stories that come out. And Ananda is his attendant and had been for a very long time, and was a very, very good attendant to the Buddha, very loyal and very, very helpful, and everybody loved Ananda. He sounds like an extremely loving chap, and just really big-hearted. But when the Buddha becomes sick on his last retreat, Ananda gets upset because he knows. And don't you, when there's something about that last year of life, I think anyway, that you think to yourself, I'd be surprised if they were still here this time next year, I get that a lot, and I get a sense that Ananda felt that, and that upset him, and he started getting upset and crying about that. And the Buddha turned to Ananda and he said, "Come on, Ananda, I've always taught you that anything that is put together, anything that is conditioned will come apart. It will change. It's impermanent. All things are like this. All things are like this." So he teaches him impermanence. And he tries to keep his mind on the impermanence of all things, including the Buddha's body. And they come out of the rains retreat and they decide to, or the Buddha decides that he needs to kind of get around. He wants to go out and see the Sangha. He wants to meet all of his disciples and he wants to talk to them. And he wants to teach them in the same way that he's teaching Ananda about impermanence. He wants to teach them about the things that are most important from his teachings. And he wants to get around as many people as he can. Even though he's a man in the last year of his life, as I said, his mind is free of the body. Pain, and he doesn't get distressed. He doesn't get upset. He feels pain, but his sort of spiritual energy, his virya, there's no way diminished by being close to the end of life. And so off they go, and not long into their travels, the news comes back that the Buddha's chief disciples, one, and then shortly after the next one, Sariputra, also dies, and the news comes through the kind of, however it comes through in ancient India, person to person presumably, and Sariputra dies. And he was the Buddha's chief disciple. He's really well renowned for teaching the Dharma to people. He was expert at explaining what the Buddha had already taught, and he had, he was the chief disciple. And then soon after that, Moggallana, who was another one of the Buddha's main disciples. If you're downstairs in the shrine room downstairs, there's pictures of these figures, and he also dies. And the news comes through, and it comes through via Ananda. And Ananda is, again, he's really upset. These close friends probably doesn't quite cut it. They're brothers in the Dharma and they're very close, and he's upset. But again, the Buddha comes back to this teaching about impermanence. All things are like this. All things are impermanent. It's important for you to understand this. And in a way, what we do, face up to it. It's important for your life. It's important for all life to face up to this the reality. So he goes off on tour, and he goes from place to place. He's kind of like, there's this image of him being strapped together like a broken old cart. He kind of pulls his body together in order to kind of just get out and get moving so that he can communicate. He's not in, like I said, he's not in any mental pain whatsoever. He's just he's just physically breaking down, probably by the day. But he goes out, and what he does, as he goes from place to place, he goes to this town and he meets people. He goes to that town and he meets people. You can read about all this in the Mahabharata, the names of the places that he went. You could probably do a pilgrimage and go to all the different places if you wanted to, and there would probably be shrines there. I don't know, but. As he goes from place to place walking on foot, the one thing he teaches over and over again is Sila, Samadhi and Prajna. He keeps teaching them Sila, Samadhi and Prajna, and it says this again and again. And he went to these people, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. Ethics, meditation, wisdom. That's what he teaches them, this path. Which is a condensed version, again, of the Noble Eightfold Path, which we heard a little bit about earlier on. The reason, I don't know the reason why he taught exactly that, but the reason why we emphasize these three things as a path and why they're so helpful is because here we are, we've got the Buddha and this mysterious mind gone beyond. And then we've got us. What is the difference? Like, what do we know this side that we don't have? Well, one thing that we definitely do have is a misunderstanding of what is really going on. So I sort of over here thinking that I'm in here, and what I feel and think is true, and you guys all out there, I can see you and I think that is true, as it is, and as it appears to me. But it doesn't take much scrutiny to realise that I don't even really know what is going on for me. Something could happen and my whole mind could completely change. Something very small could happen, my whole situation could change. So that's highly changeable and not really very reliable. And out there is also not very reliable either, because it's all coming in through our senses and being mediated in our mind, and how is our mind, and that's going through them. And we get it wrong, basically. In compared to how the Buddha might see things, who's seeing things much more clearly, we are making this sort of root delusion. We're making this mistake about us being in here. I'm a self, and there's all this world out there, and there's all these others, and we're not seeing actually more what really goes on. But Sila, Samadhi and Prajna, ethics, meditation and wisdom, systematically starts to undermine all that. You can just take this up. So skillful actions, unselfish actions basically, because the problem with this delusion is it makes you think everything revolves around you. So the best way to sort of start undermining it is do things for other people, or at least behave in a way that's beneficial to other people. So, or speak in a way that's beneficial to other people. So that is always available to us. We can always start there. We can always start with some helpful, hopefully positive and creative actions in the world. And then what that will do is that will support meditation. That will support us on a mental level. So if we sit down to meditate, if we've been behaving skillfully, that will then support our meditation, and our meditation becomes calmer and clearer and more bright and more calm and more relaxed and everything else that it needs to be. And then on the basis of that, we might be able to see through this delusion. We on the basis of that preparation, and you do this preparation, it's a practice, isn't it? You do it again, and you do it again, and sometimes you do it well, and sometimes practice is going good, sometimes practice is not going good, you do it again, and you do it again, you do it your whole life. It's a path, and you just keep doing it, life after life. And we hope to, out of that, have realizations, deepen prajna, which is wisdom. We want to deepen wisdom. We want that to sink right through us, and have it sort of radiating out of us. We want to have this delusion completely seen through, this delusion that I'm sort of in the center of the world. We want that to sort of be completely gone. That is the sort of, as far as we know, the pitch of prajna. And this is what the Buddha is teaching. Everywhere he goes, he teaches the same thing, this path. Do this, guys, come on. And he comes to a place called Pava. And lots of things are happening. I can't tell you all the story, but lots of things are happening along the way. And some of them are a bit mysterious, and you read them and you think, what? And then but I'm going to stick with just a few of the stories, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but he gets to Pava, and he meets Kunda the goldsmith's son, and he's staying in Kunda the goldsmith's mango grove. So Kunda the goldsmith is very generous, and so when I say the Buddha is walking from place to place, I mean with all of his disciples as well. And they're in this I think it's a mango grove that belongs to Kunda the goldsmith's son, and when Kunda the goldsmith's son finds the Buddha there, he says, "Well, look, please come. I want to make you a special meal. I really want to make you a special meal tomorrow. I'll get it all sorted." So that's what he does, and the Buddha agrees. And they all go along, all the monks, and this special meal gets brought to the Buddha, specially prepared by And the Buddha eats the meal, and then he sort of pulls Kunda aside and says, just take this meal and go and bury it. Don't let anyone else eat it. And because there was something in that food that made the Buddha really ill, and basically gave him dysentery and made him really ill. But he doesn't, he's definitely not upset with Kunda. He just bears this sickness without any complaint whatsoever. He's got dysentery. And off they go again, and he just picks up from where he was, and off he goes again to find a new town with more of his disciples that he wants to speak to them. Going from place to place, teaching them the path, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. That's what he is doing, and nothing is particularly going to get in the way of that. But he's getting pretty ill, and he's getting pretty close to the end of his life. He's at this point where he there's this period. He soon after he stops, and he's they're by a river, and he's washing. I can imagine the state of him, and he's washing, and he's getting a drink, and he thinks of Kunda again, and he thinks, calls Ananda over, and he says, you have to go and see Kunda for me. You have to go and tell him that that the meal that he gave me, it was highly meritorious. That's going to be the last meal that I eat. I can't eat anything more. The merit that he's going to get from feeding the Buddha his last meal, that's highly, highly great and wonderful. You go and tell Kunda, and he's also a bit worried that people might be upset with Kunda, and he doesn't want Kunda to feel bad either. So he turns it all on his head, and he says, well, actually, you've given me this meal. And then he gives a teaching on generosity. So off the back of this, because actually Kunda made him this special meal because he wanted to give him something that would give him a bit more energy. He actually wanted to give him a meal that would keep him going a bit longer. He was hoping that natural urge to kind of preserve life that you have, as sick as somebody is, it still always feels right to kind of try and just make them feel better, give them some energy from somewhere. People get very concerned when their loved ones stop eating and drinking, for instance. We talk them through that. It's a really common question. But he can't eat anymore. Everything just goes straight through him, presumably. And even in that, he gives this teaching on generosity, and he talks about how generosity works directly on enmity. So the sort of mental state of enmity. If you're generous, you'll be working directly against enmity, which is obviously not a very helpful mental state. Trying to work towards wisdom. From there, he goes to I think it's a city, Kusinara. I think it's classed as a city in those days, a big place anyway. And outside of Kusinara, the Mullahs, there's a tribe of people in that area called the Mullahs, and they've built a grove of sal trees. So these are huge, big, tall trees, great big green leaves, and they've planted it. So a lot of the Buddha's life wandering around, he would have been walking through some pretty frightful jungle and some pretty hairy places, but this, I imagine, it's still outdoors. There's still going to be lots of animals and wildlife, but it is a grove. It is something that has been built especially, and you can sort of imagine the beauty of a place like that. And they've planted a big row of these trees. I forget the sort of directions it is, but they've planted this big row of trees, basically so that at the end of this great big long row of trees, a big sort of corridor between the trees, and sort of you've got this stone couch, and the stone couch obviously catches the sun. It's like the most beautiful part of the grove is this beautiful stone couch. And the Buddha goes there. He's getting very close to the end of his life. And he lays down on this couch. And the trees, these sal trees, have got these big white flowers. And it's not the season for the flowers to be there, but they're there anyway. The Buddha's passing away is quite a thing to consider for the whole sort of cosmos. And even the trees don't miss the significance, and they burst into flower. And these flowers, as he lays down, that's why we've got these flowers. The flowers are falling on the Buddha and falling around the Buddha. The disciples are there, and they're getting on with their practice, they're getting on with their meditation, they're attending to the Buddha. And they're taking the situation in as they should, and their meditation's going deeper, and you can sort of, I don't know, we like to have this similar sort of atmosphere here on Paranirvana Day, just that really calm atmosphere of people just practicing and really making the most of their lives, and the disciples are there. Some of the lay people, I suppose you call them, were doing things like preparing his funeral. And there was this chap, one of his attendants called Upavana, and he's fanning the Buddha and trying to keep him cool. And actually, despite his good intentions, the Buddha has to tell Upavana, you need to step aside. Upavana, you're getting in the way there. There's all these deities, there's millions of these deities have come, I'm passing away here, and they want to see me, and you're standing in the way. And these deities are sort of protesting. They're like, we want to see the Buddha. This is our favourite thing to do. The deities is see the Buddha and see the disciples going to the Buddha and worshipping the Buddha. That is what the deities love to see. And this chap's in the way with a fan. So he politely moves aside. And then at this point, Ananda, ever present, he goes away. He walks away because he's overcome with grief now. He goes to a little outbuilding somewhere, not out of sight, sort of out of the way, because he probably can't handle his emotions and knows how he feels, and leans up sort of against the door frame and just starts breaking down, thinking about the Buddha and thinking about the Buddha being gone. And he brings to mind the Buddha, and he says, "He who was so kind to me, he who was so kind to me." Yeah, of all the things to say about the Buddha, of all the wonderful things he'd done, and of all his qualities, the thing that most stood out to his closest attendant was how kind he was. I mean, that's Buddhism, that's like half of Buddhism right there, isn't it? If we can, think on that kindness. And the Buddha, he's so aware of people and so considerate of people, even at this stage, as ill as he was, and he calls Ananda back, and he poor Ananda gets the teaching again on impermanence, but this time the Buddha doesn't hold back in his rejoicing of Ananda to all the disciples that are around, and he says, Ananda's wonderful. He's wise. I can't remember exactly the sort of, there's a simile that he uses, but it's basically like everywhere that Ananda goes, people are happy, basically. And if he's not there, people are a bit unsatisfied. If he's not there, people just don't feel like something's not right. And the Buddha sort of goes really into this and really, really rejoices in Ananda, his long-time attendant, and how helpful how helpful he been to the Buddha. All those years. But there was more people. As, the Buddha then sends Ananda into Kusinara and says, look, you need to go to Kusinara, tell them that I'm dying. People will want to know. They will not want to not know that I'm dying. Let them know, give them a chance to come if they want to come. So he goes to Kusinara, and the word gets out very quickly that the Buddha is he's going to die that night, and they need to come if they're going to come at all. And then the people start to come to the grove. And one of the people that comes is this guy, Subhada, who's an ascetic. So he's sort of in the town, he's in the vicinity. He's a wanderer, he's a wandering mendicant. And Kuslasara talked about this chap, and he's earlier, and he wanted to meet the Buddha. And the Buddha, initially Ananda doesn't let him go. He's like, look, he's very close to the end of his life. You can't go and see him now. But the Buddha's aware, and he says, no, let him through. Let him come through. Let Subhada come through. And he gives him the teaching again. This time he unfolds the path a bit further. He does teach him on the Noble Eightfold Path, so he expands the path already given. So he's going back to the basics. This is the teaching that he first gave. It's the sort of fundamental teaching. It's a path, you need to practice it. This is what you need to do, the Noble Eightfold Path. And Subhada, who's been a wandering ascetic and seeker for a long time and heard lots of things, he just commits to this. He just says, fine. And he goes for refuge to the Buddha. And the Buddha says, yes, you need to ordain Subhada. And then this is how considerate he is. He said, right, you need to go and ordain him now. And he tells Ananda what you need to do. You need to shave his head. You need to give him some robes. You need to administer the refuges and precepts to Subhada. You have to do all these things for him. And what I find really interesting is that at this point, his last disciple, he doesn't tell him how to live. The Buddha doesn't. He doesn't say, "All right, you're one of my disciples now. What you need to do is," he doesn't tell him how to live. He gives him principles of practice, and he says, "Just commit to those, and you'll be my disciple. If anywhere you find these principles, that will be true." And yes, he ordains him and gives him a robe. But this ordination that he receives is an ordination that we try to sort of emulate in a way. We're not asked when we're ordained to live a particular lifestyle. We're not. It's not like, okay, if you live here at the Buddhist Center and always tidy up the mats, you'll be ordained. It's not like that at all. At all. In a way, it's a bit unnerving. It's like, well, you become more and more committed to these principles, and you get on with it in your life, and you live your life as fully as you can, in the way that you see fit. It's on you. Go and do it. So, yeah, I've got 3 children. Someone else doesn't have children. It doesn't matter your lifestyle. It's secondary. And that is what I really thought was interesting. It's right here in the Buddha's last disciple. Go for refuge and follow the path. In a way, there is another teaching, and I'm not sure of the chronology of this teaching particularly. But before he dies, he does enjoin on Ananda. And because Ananda remembers everything, it's in the scriptures because it's an oral tradition that gets handed on. But I've got a feeling he probably would have said this to a few of the people. But what he says is, once the Buddha is gone, once my body's passed away, once I'm gone, there's a sort of sense that you're all kind of equal. But when I'm gone, people should address each other in this way. So people that are more senior should address each other in this way. People that are newer should address each other that way. And what he sort of lays out is a kind of a path of friendship, like a path of vertical friendship. So it says some people have done this longer. Some people have got more experience. Maybe some people have got more actual aptitude for this. And you need to revere and respect them. The Buddha is gone. So without those elders, without those people with that experience, what have you got? That needs to be your, almost like that needs to be the Buddha for you. And interestingly, as the tradition evolves, people take that quite literally and do see their teacher as the Buddha. But the one final and last teaching that he gives to everybody. And he asked the people gathered, he asked the Sangha gathered, if anybody has any more questions, please, let's have them once and for all. And nobody answers. The assembly is silent. And he just checks again. And then he says, okay, maybe you want to ask a friend to ask. Just to be sure. But again, everyone's silent. Everyone's clear. They've got the path. And then he gives his last teaching, his last words. And they go, I'll try and say it in Pali. Vaya Dhamma Sankara Apamadena Sampadeta. All conditioned things are impermanent. With mindfulness, strive on. And then, a short time after that, he dies. He doesn't... Yeah, he does. He dies. But he goes through... Again, we're sort of in this world of mystery. It's just mysterious what actually happens. Because even in the dying process, some really... Anuruddha, who's very, very highly attained... can sense the Buddha doing these different meditations and going higher and higher up and down these different meditations, up and then down and then up, and then his body passes away. So it's incredibly mysterious what actually happened. But for us, it definitely helps us sort of consider the potential for meaning in life. It helps us think about kindness and the importance of kindness. We've got the Buddha's last words of striving on with mindfulness. And in the image of the Buddha we have the serving of an ideal that's sort of bigger than ourselves. So we have gratitude for the Buddha's life because he gives us an object that helps us go beyond ourselves.